It is with gratitude that I introduce to you author, activist, grief recovery specialist, and award-winning Professor Emeritus of Natural Resources and Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from the University of Arizona. Please welcome Dr. Guy R. McPherson.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions today, and most notably, what shall we do? What shall we do as individuals, given that we have relatively short lives? The world's oldest human being at the time, in March of 2015, was celebrating her 117th birthday party. And she was asked to ponder those first 117 years of her life, and she said, "It seemed rather short." To put a punctuation mark on her message, and apparently mine, a few weeks later she died. It seemed rather short at 117 years. I pretty much guarantee nobody in this room has 117 years in them. I also guarantee that it will seem rather short. What shall we do? What will you do? What is worth doing, given that you've been given a terminal diagnosis? And we've all been given a terminal diagnosis. How do we live with that information? I suggest we live with urgency. I suggest we do what we love and do it well. I suggest that we take actions that allow us at the end of the day to look ourselves in the mirror without embarrassment. As Edward Abbey pointed out, sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul. And I don't know of anybody in hospice, anybody who's been given a terminal diagnosis of 2 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 2 years that has just, in response to that message, has just said, "Oh, screw it, I'm going to die. I'm just going to curl up in a ball. I'm going to be depressed and not take any actions from here on out." What if you have 2 months to live? What if you have 2 years to live? What if you have 8 years to live? Does your answer change? Do you live with more urgency? Do you complete relationships that are otherwise incomplete? With other human beings? With nature? With yourself? How do we act? How do you act? With respect to climate change, we've had a few warnings along the way. It was 1847 that U.S. Ambassador and naturalist George Perkins Marsh warned about global warming as a result of burning fossil fuels, 1847. It was 1896 when the first Referee Journal article appeared, courtesy of Svante Arrhenius, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And he predicted a 1 degree Celsius global average rise in temperature by the year 2000 in 1896 because of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And he missed it by that much. 104 years in advance he made that prediction. More recently, Noel Brown, the director of the New York office of the United Nations Environment Program, on the 29th of June, 1989, said we got 10 years. We got 10 years to solve this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere problem before the situation spins out of human control, before natural processes take over and humans no longer are able to do anything to control emissions of carbon dioxide, which is what he was referring to. You can find this in just about the archives of just about any major newspaper in the United States. It was put out by the Associated Press. Well, by my count, that's 37 years ago. We had 10 years. We've had other warnings. It was that same body, or part of that same body, the United Nations, in this case, the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases, that warned in October 1990, less than a year and a half after Noel Brown's statement, that 1 degree Celsius is the absolute upper limit beyond which we cannot cross, or we will trigger rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear climate change, the likes of which we're seeing today, that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. See, the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases knew that what really matters for human animals on the planet is habitat. What matters for us, what matters for every other species on the planet is habitat. I'm a conservation biologist. The three pillars of conservation biology are speciation, when and with what predecessors a species comes into existence, extinction, when and for what reasons, almost always absence of habitat, species go extinct, and habitat. What does it take to support life? It varies for different species, but all species require fundamentally habitat, the ability to secure water, food, maintain body temperature. Those are the big ones. At some point, rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear changes will, and I would argue already are, leading to extensive ecosystem damage, so that we have situations like this. At some point in the not too distant future, the cattle that die as a result of lack of food are us. We're animals too. We need food just as much as the cattle do. So we've had these warnings for a long time. In fact, climate writer and speaker David Spratt said in October 2014 that 1 degree was way too high, that a half a degree was probably what's important. We're currently at more than 1.6 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline that we're talking about here. 1750 baseline, global average temperature of 13.5 degrees Celsius is a period of stability, stable global average temperature, and relatively cool global average temperature, 1.5 degrees Celsius, about 3 degrees Fahrenheit above ice age. So it's a pretty cool Earth. It's a relatively cool temperature and stable temperature that allowed civilizations to develop for the first time a few thousand years ago. Our genus Homo, goes back 2.8 million years. Civilizations never arose during that entire time until, coming out of the last ice age, temperature stabilized just 1.5 degrees Celsius above ice age. It's at cool temperature and stability that allows us to grow grains at scale, therefore store those grains and distribute them at scale, and therefore support every version of civilization so far. So we're well beyond the 0.5 C, we're well beyond the 1 degree that the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases warned about. We're well beyond 1999, which is the 10-year window that Noel Brown warned about. So we've had all these warnings, and the general response has been something like this. And you know, there's no blame here. I'm not saying that all of you people are going over the cliff while staring at your digital devices. I'm saying that so many of us did that and continue to do that, that we act as if what really matters doesn't really matter. Somebody points us to the abyss, we got our eyes on the prize, or the precious as I like to call mine, and over the cliff we go. Again, in addition to abrupt climate change, not just a linear, gradual change that most of us are familiar with and heard about from Al Gore, for example, with his 2007 film and book, we're now in the midst of abrupt climate change, and that's not our only problem by any stretch of the imagination. We've also entered the sixth mass extinction. Scientists were writing about the sixth mass extinction on Earth for the last 20 years in various books. And finally, the incredibly conservative referee journal literature caught up about 2 years ago when Ceballos and colleagues in a paper stunningly titled in Science Advances, Accelerated Modern Human-Induced Species Losses Entering the Sixth Mass Extinction. My God, could you write anything less clear? You know, after I left active service at the University of Arizona more than 8 years ago, a year or two later, I was asked at a panel meeting to please write up some of my ideas. And so I'd been away from active university life and writing referee journal articles for a couple of years. And I wrote up a journal article for the journal Conservation Biology. And by the time the editor, the lead editor and the copy editor sent it back to me, all fixed up in academic language, I couldn't read it anymore. Because I hadn't been reading this kind of academic language for a year or two, and so I didn't even recognize it. When this is your title, who are you trying to convince of anything? If I can interpret for you, what this means is accelerated modern human-induced species losses entering the 6th mass extinction. There have been 5 previous mass extinction events on planet Earth. To qualify as a mass extinction event, more than 50% of the species on Earth go extinct. Ceballos and colleagues are saying that we have entered the 6th mass extinction event, and it was induced by human activity. That's it. I mean, could they not write, humans, you screwed it up? That would be too clear. Ceballos, in an interview coincident with the release of the paper, said, quote, life would take many millions of years to recover, and our species itself would likely disappear early on. And of course, that's been the trend with each of the previous mass extinction events, so that's what we would expect in the wake of this one. Life would take many millions of years to recover. And during that time, it will be a small world. During the Great Dying 252.2 million years ago, the worst of the mass extinction events, and one of 3 now affiliated with an abrupt rise in temperature as opposed to an abrupt decline in global average temperature. During that event, 252.2 million years ago, more than 90% of the species on the planet went extinct. And most complex multicellular life, things that look a lot like us, went extinct. It was a small world. This time, the rate of change with respect to global average temperature and the rate of change with respect to species extinction is proceeding an order of magnitude faster than it did during the Great Dying. So when they say accelerated modern human-induced species losses, we're talking about really accelerated. Way more than what we have observed with nature in the past. Again, the question is, how does one live with a terminal diagnosis? I'm frequently accused of promoting inaction. And in fact, it was about a year and a half ago in the New York Times, I was referred to as a nutty professor. But then 2 days ago in the Washington Post, the other leading mouthpiece of empire, I was referred to as, quote, doomist cult hero. And I don't think that's right. I'm thinking about writing them or maybe suing them for libel because I'm not a doomist cult hero. I'm a doomist cult superhero. I mean, is that so hard? Again, action is the antidote to despair. As one of my early influences, Edward Abbey, points out, action, action, action. We don't roll over and die when we've been told that we're going to die. What that does for most people is encourage them to live more urgently. If you have 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years, and you know with great certainty that you have a limited amount of time on the planet, do you give up? Do you quit? Do you stop living? Most people don't. My response to the terminal diagnosis, which I recognized relatively early in my life, and so did all of you, right? You knew when you were 11 or 12 that you were going to die. I remember crying for my grandmother, who I barely knew, when she died when I was 11. And it took me years to figure out that I wasn't crying for her. I barely knew her. I was crying for me. She just reminded me that I'm going to die too. I thought that was a real bummer. My response to this information for a long time has been radicalism. This, as a reminder, is called a radical. This thing right here, when I ask in college classrooms, what is that? Everybody says it's a square root symbol. No, that's what it does, that's its function, but what is it called? It's called a radical. Why is it called a radical? Because if you look in the definition, if you look in your dictionary for a definition of the word radical, it says to get to the root. Radical is that which gets to the root. Radical is not extremist. This culture has lied to you about that. Radical does not mean terrorist. Radical Islam. Sounds like a terrible thing to me. Radical means get to the root. So this is me, speaking in 1978 with all the hubris I could possibly muster at the age of 18, telling my contemporaries that if you have to be a nonconformist to reach a goal, just go ahead. Just giving the entire other 36 people in my graduating class permission to be radicals. I don't think many of the 36 paid attention to them. I'm not too surprised. So my approach to the terminal diagnosis has been to try to get to the root of as many issues as I can, to dig deep. And that's what I'm doing with respect to abrupt climate change, what I'm talking about here today. And for more than 20 years in an academic career, I tried to get at the root of myriad factors associated with this set of living arrangements. These are what I call lies my culture told me. And the culture doesn't scream them out loud, because if anybody comes up to you and tells you in their out loud voice that humans are obviously superior species, you would probably shake your head. No, I don't think that's right. And yet, we call the other animals, the non-human animals on the planet, we have a word for them. Lesser animals? Collectively, they're lesser animals. Well, lesser than what? You must be talking about humans. So we don't say we're superior, but we certainly believe it, and we act like it. We're driving, according to the United Nations Environment Program, again, with a report published in August of 2010, we're driving an estimated 150 to 200 species to extinction every day. Those are lesser species, obviously, which is why we don't get all concerned about it. At some point, if you foul your nest every single day, at some point you're going to get some shit on your feathers. How can you avoid it? And that's what we've been doing for a long time. If I say out loud that we can have infinite growth on a finite planet, you would laugh. Nobody believes that. And yet we all do. We all act as if that's true. Every time you open a checking account with a positive interest rate, you're buying into the infinite growth paradigm. You put money in the bank, you leave it there for 10 years, you get more money out. Nobody ever tells you you'll get less money. Therefore, you just bought it. You just bought the infinite growth paradigm. We'll always have more. We can grow forever. The only thing limiting our growth is our imagination. You hear these things all the time, and what the culture is really telling you is that we can have infinite growth on a finite planet. More is better, of course it is. More of everything. We monetize everything. We've been doing this for a while. But for the most part, we depended upon nature to grow stuff for us. Now we monetize everything, including food and water, because that's easiest. But we also monetize air. In China, you can buy air canned in New Zealand for 85 cents US a breath. 85 cents. In this country, we still get to breathe for free. And the air is still relatively clean. That's not going to last long. As soon as somebody figures out how to make a buck, or even 85 cents off a breath of air, you can bet it's coming your way too. So we monetize absolutely everything to the point that money becomes the most important thing. In this country, it's been all about the money for every single thing for as long as I can remember. Also, and I really catch a lot of hell for this one, hope. How can anybody disparage hope? Hope is the best thing there is. Without hope, why bother living at all? The Washington Post, 2 days ago, basically called me an idiot for not believing that hope is a good thing. Grist did the same thing, The Guardian did the same. There's a long list of people who are not impressed with me this week. But really, we hear all the time, if you just think positive, that's better than thinking negatively. Thinking positive means that things will turn out to be positive. And if you think negatively, then you deserve what you get. And so apparently all of you deserve what you get because I thought negatively about abrupt climate change. I'm sorry about that. This is not true. Hope, for one thing, if you look at the definition in your dictionary, it's ridiculous. It's wishful thinking. It's wishing for an outcome over which we have no agency. Hope is hoping that somebody else will deal with it. It's the other side of the coin that has fear on the one side. We hope for the best, we fear the worst, we don't do a damn thing about any of it. And then, of course, this civilization, like all prior civilizations, is characterized by endemic racism, endemic misogyny, and endemic monetary disparity leading to poverty. Every single one. 3 or 4 years ago, there were 42 people, all men, who collectively had as much financial wealth as half the people on the planet. And then a couple of years ago, the number was 20, still all men. And then about a year ago, it was 8, and now it's 5. 5 men have the same amount of financial wealth as half the people on the planet. And this is what happens with every civilization. There's a distribution of wealth to fewer and fewer people, and we think that's okay. And in this country, when just a few months ago, an election was complete, and an overt misogynist, an overt racist, who happens to be very wealthy, was elected president, people were surprised. The apex of industrial civilization elects a racist, misogynist person who is really wealthy, and people are surprised. I think it's actually a perfect representative for the country. And I'm apolitical. I just find the whole thing absurd. In the United States, this has been going on for a long time. He's hardly the first racist and misogynist president in this country. He's hardly the first wealthy president in this country. Daniel Dennett is talking about religion when he says there's simply no polite way to tell people they've dedicated their lives to an illusion. And I'm referring to religion as well when I use his quote and say there's no polite way to tell people they've dedicated their lives to the illusion known as civilization. And it's an illusion. It's characterized by all these lies that we never speak about, that we all live, but we just don't talk about it. We don't talk about anything that's important. We don't talk about fouling the air, strip mining the forest, washing the soil into the sea, and we don't talk about dirtying the water. We don't talk about any of those things. We don't talk about bodily functions. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about grief. We don't talk about grieving. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about dying. What the f are we talking about? When I recognized what was going on here, and I recognized that it was a heat engine that was killing everything and ultimately killing ourselves, I took the action that I encourage people to take. I did what I thought was the right thing. I established a homestead in southern New Mexico that was off-grid in a straw bale house. It had a bunch of solar panels. It had 2 solar pumps and a hand pump and an outdoor kitchen, and grew a bunch of food, and had a biochar kiln, and learned how to cook food with the sun and canned food, and wrote about it in a book called Walking Away from Empire. And here I am, somebody who was a relatively successful professor at a major university, and I wrote a book about it, and I just assumed everybody would follow along. I'm a teacher. You people just need to model my behavior. I'm so naive. Why didn't you tell me how ridiculous I was? That was more than 8 years ago. As nearly as I can tell, exactly 0 people followed that lead. And that's not very many. As it turns out, the heat engine has been described best by Tim Garrett, an atmospheric scientist at the University of Utah, initially in the journal Climatic Change. Based on the laws of thermodynamics, Garrett finds that civilization itself is a heat engine. regardless of how we power civilization, solar panels, wind turbines, wave power, fossil fuels, civilization itself is a heat engine. Once you store food, once you're able to control the food, therefore control the masses, we have all kinds of outcomes that are produced. Interestingly, in an excellent, albeit minor example of the importance of politics in the scientific process, Garrett first wrote about this in 2007, published his initial paper, submitted his initial paper to 10 different journals in 2007. They all turned it down. The paper was initially published electronically in November 2009 in the journal Climatic Change by an incredibly brave editor who made the decision after the paper was peer-reviewed blindly by colleagues. The paper was published, and then Schneider drew all kinds of negative response, and the paper was pulled from publication so that nobody could see it anymore because all these relatively wealthy, privileged academic scientists just couldn't believe that somebody was saying in their out loud voice that civilization itself was a heat engine and that somehow that was a bad thing. So the paper was pulled until 2 research groups could respond, and then all 3 of the papers were prepared in print form, Garrett's original paper and 2 responses from 2 research groups, and Garrett was not allowed to respond to those comments. This is the politics of science. Great work based on thermodynamics. Only collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change. Neither of the 2 responses indicated anything differently. Only collapse of industrial civilization prevents runaway climate change. Notice the publication date, February 2011, the ultimate publication date. Well, now we know, based on subsequent research, that the collapse of civilization actually causes an abrupt temperature rise. Only the collapse of industrial civilization prevents runaway climate change, and the collapse of industrial civilization triggers runaway climate change. Uh-oh, that sounds like trouble to me. When Garrett had his paper published, we knew almost nothing about global dimming or the aerosol effect, the aerosol masking effect. Here's what we do. Here's what we do with industrial civilization. We burn a bunch of fossil fuels that act as a greenhouse to trap some of the long wave radiation that enters the atmosphere and hold that radiation closer to the Earth and therefore allow the planet to heat up. Everybody knows about the greenhouse effect. This is nothing you don't already know. What most people don't know is that in addition to producing the greenhouse effect and therefore heating the planet, industrial civilization also puts sulfates up into the atmosphere, and those sulfates act as an umbrella and prevent a bunch of solar radiation from ever entering the atmosphere at all. The initial paper on this in the refereed journal literature was published 9 months after Garrett's original paper appeared in print form in Climatic Change, published by James Hansen and colleagues, and indicated 1.2 plus or minus 0.2 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise once those aerosols fall out of the atmosphere. They're falling out all the time. When we stop putting them back up, it takes a few days for them to all fall out. A few days. It's virtually instantaneous. So if we were to turn off the switch of civilization today, if we were to all recognize that civilization is doing terrible things to us and to the planet, and so therefore we convince all the leaders in the world to turn off the switch tomorrow, no more civilization, no more burning any fossil fuels, because that has horrible impacts, including the greenhouse effect. If we were to do that, according to this initial paper, the planet would heat up a little more than 1 degree. According to later work, that increase would be up to about 3 degrees Celsius, global average temperature rise. We're currently at least 1.6 degrees Celsius above baseline. 1.6 plus 3 is 4.6. That doesn't sound so bad. After all, we're clever organisms. But remember when 2 degrees was supposed to be safe? 4.6 doesn't sound so rosy, does it? If 2 is safe. And even if we take the most conservative approach, we're currently at 1.6 above the 1750 baseline. Add 1.2 to that, 1.2 added to 2.6 is 3.8. So if we turn off the switch of the heat engine, bam, within a week, we're at 3.8. We've had humans on the planet about 2 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. Ouch. A little more science. So the key point there is that civilization itself is a heat engine, no matter how it's operated, and if we turn off the heat engine, the planet heats up even faster. Classic catch-22. The other scientific point I want to drive home here is that according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's vaunted 5th assessment, officially released in 2014, but heavily leaked beginning as early as September 2013, global warming is irreversible. This is one of the most conservative scientific bodies in the history of the planet. And they say, based on consensus and political vetting of the results, they say that global warming is irreversible without massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry. And what that means, according to a headline at Truth Out shortly thereafter, that the Intergovernmental Panel report leaves hopes hanging on fantasy technology. Because there's no way to do that. Massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry is the only way to reverse global warming, and we can't do it. It's not just Truth Out, it's not just the popular press. It's perhaps the most distinguished scientific body in the world, the United States National Academy of Sciences, that concludes the same thing, along with this European body of similar stature. Geoengineering can't work. So geoengineering is the only thing that can work, and geoengineering can't work. Oh my, I'm getting so confused. What do you expect us to do? You turn off the civilization heat engine, you turn off the heat, because that's what it takes. And what that does is cause it to heat up even more. We need to do massive geoengineering, but we can't do massive geoengineering. I can't believe you're all sitting here still. I had to run out screaming by now. How hot, how fast? That's the question. Sam Carana, here's an interesting story, speaking of politics. Sam Carana is 2 or 3 people, probably climate scientists, writing under a pseudonym. Sam Carana is way smarter than me. I write using my actual name. I speak writing using my actual name, and as a consequence, I don't have a job. And nobody could do what I do and remain supported in their work. I was a tenured full professor before the age of 40. I know 3 people in the world that can claim that. It's unbelievably rare. I received the highest accolades for teaching and mentoring in all 3 of the colleges at the University of Arizona, the one that was my home department and the only 2 transdisciplinary colleges at the university, the highest award they give for teaching and mentoring, the graduate college and the honors college. I was really good at what I did, and I was not supported in my work. Camille Parmesan was a conservation biologist at the University of Texas, and she was writing unspeakable things too. She was heavily censored, so she moved to England. Jason Box was a glaciologist at Ohio State University. His work was heavily censored by Ohio State University, so he moved to Denmark. Peter Wadhams was director of the ocean physics program at Cambridge University. Cambridge University! And he was forced into retirement because he was writing and speaking the unspeakable. That's 4 major universities that I know about that have censored or forced into retirement leading voices on relevant topics. Small wonder Sam Carana won't tell you his name or her name. Could be Samantha, after all. It's probably 2 individuals, maybe 3. According to an analysis conducted by Carana, in the middle of last year, we have locked in a temperature rise of more than 10 degrees Celsius over the course of the next decade. This is the global average temperature of the planet for the last 2 billion years. And the yellow line is where Carana's analysis takes us. This is Ice Age, 12 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hothouse, 22 degrees Celsius. This is dinosaur days. That's the most common temperature the Earth has found itself at for the last 2 billion years, and it's clearly the most stable. That's 72 degrees Fahrenheit. It sounds warm, it sounds nice, doesn't it? 72 degrees, who wouldn't like that? Well, most plant life on the planet, for starters, if we go there too fast. And then one time in the last 2 billion years, the global average temperature exceeded 22 degrees Celsius, or 72 degrees Fahrenheit, went up to 23, right there, during the Great Dying, 252.2 million years ago, the worst of the mass extinction events on planet Earth. It took somewhere between 880 and 19,800 years to go from Ice Age to 23 degrees Celsius, and we're headed there in a decade. That doesn't seem like it's going to be all that great. We've had humans on the planet for a very short period of time, only about 300,000 years. 300,000 years, so that's a skinny little wedge. That's how long our species, Homo sapiens, the wise ape, has been on the planet. The genus Homo goes back 2.8 million years, about somewhere in here. So we've been here a relatively short period of time, Homo sapiens, and only at a relatively modest range of temperatures, from Ice Age to about 2 degrees Celsius above baseline. Baseline is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. That's 13.5 degrees Celsius. 2 degrees above that is 15.5 degrees Celsius. That's not very high up there. So this is from James Hansen work in a legal brief filed a couple of years ago. Humans on the planet, only 2 degrees Celsius above baseline, up to about 15.5 degrees Celsius. And remember, again, humans have been here for a relatively short period of time. So we tend to think of ourselves as very special, and I agree with that, not just me, but all of us. I mean, we're amazing. We have these opposable thumbs and these big brains, and we figured out how to see what's going on in the cosmos and also what's going on in a little glass of water. And we're incredible. We have these digital devices where we can not only contact people on the other side of the world, but we can quickly find out that everything I'm saying tonight is actually rooted in evidence, that I'm not making this up. You can pull out a digital device from your pocket, most of you, and click a few buttons, and sure enough, you find out that James Hansen did in fact say what I'm saying he said. I'm not just making this stuff up. I am not merely a doomist cult superhero. I'm also a radical, and what I'm saying is rooted in evidence. According to an analysis conducted by The Guardian, written up by Oliver Tickell in August of 2008, at 4 degrees, 4C above the 1750 baseline, 13.5 degrees Celsius, at 4C above baseline, which is about right here, all we can prepare for is human extinction. So this is where we've been so far as a species. We're right here today. We're at least right here. We might be a little higher than that because this graph is a year old, and it appears that we've increased that by about 0.2C, but I'm taking a conservative approach here because we're talking about our favorite species after all, so I don't want to get hyperbolic. So we're probably about right here, and according to the synthesis in The Guardian, from their headline, all we can plan for is extinction, and that's right there. So maybe if we keep it down to there, we'll be fine, or maybe if we keep it down below there, we'll be fine, but at some point, and we don't even know, right? We don't know when we're going to go extinct. We're still here. Yeah, I'm still here. You're still here. You're still alive. I love this little Louis C.K. bit, by the way. Louis C.K., stand-up comic, best social critic working today. And he goes on about life and how it's really not that big, not that good of a deal. Not that big a deal. I mean, he points out that everybody who's alive today is just the people who didn't commit suicide yesterday. And he said by a razor-thin margin for most of us. It's like, do I want to live for another day? Oh, geez, I guess so. I'll keep doing the same shit. Yeah, I guess I'll trudge through another day. And that's where we are, right? The people who are here today are just the ones who didn't commit suicide yesterday. Here by the most razor-thin of margins. I mean, some days I can just barely get out of bed. It's all. William James, the pragmatic American philosopher, towards the end of his career, which ended when he died in 1910, he was asked why he gets out of bed, and he writes, I have great difficulty getting out of bed every day, because he was such a, for lack of a better word, doomer. You know, he was a philosopher he was enlightened. He knew what was going on in the world, and he knew that at some level, society was just horrible. And so he struggled every single day to get out of bed. So people ask me all the time, well, if you're such a doomist cult superhero, they almost never use that word. If you're such a doomer, if you think that we're going extinct, if you think life is so marginally worth living, then why don't you kill yourself? Why don't you just get it over with? What gets you out of bed in the morning? People ask me that all the time. And for me, I have TB, tiny bladder. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm taking a whiz before I even realize I'm awake. And then I'm out and I go, oh, geez, I got up again. I didn't even get to think about it. Again, it's all about habitat. Let's say I'm a realtor, and nobody would buy a house from me. But let's just say I'm a realtor. With my background in conservation biology, my motto would be habitat, habitat, habitat. Because that's what matters, and that's what matters to every species on the planet. It matters to the livestock. It matters to the 150 to 200 species we drove to extinction today. It's all about the habitat. It's not all about the money. It's all about the habitat. So, in Carana's analysis, he comes up with 10 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise. I take a really conservative approach and look at all the things that he stacks up to conclude that we're headed to that high of a temperature rise in the next 10 years. Albedo changes in the Arctic, seafloor methane, extra water vapor feedback, removal of the aerosol masking effect, or global dimming that I already mentioned with the umbrella, and so on. And I come up with a slightly lower number. I come up with 8.7 degrees or more above the 1750 baseline by the middle of 2026. So remember, at 4C, all we can plan for is extinction. And at minimum, I think we're headed for 8.7C. And this is our response. And it's no wonder the millennials are so pissed off. Millennials who are in my audience feel liberated when they're done, when they hear me speak. They're really irritated. They go to college and they are told in their college classes by their boomer professors that the professor's generation made horrible mistakes. Sorry about that, we really screwed it up. And then, that's not, that's fine. Taking responsibility for our collective omnicide of the earth is great. It doesn't do anything, but at least admits that we might have had something to do with the disaster that we've created. But then the next thing every college professor who's earning a paycheck says is, you're going to have to fix it. You're going to have to fix it. Imagine you're like me and you're a boomer and say you had a business. Say you had a business and you cut every corner, and as a consequence your business has been teetering on the edge the whole time, and you've completely screwed the planet. You've poured all the paint into the ground, and so you violated the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, and you've really screwed up everything. And so every place that you've had an impact, the world is dead. That's the basis for your business, and it's made a lot of money. And now it's time to hand it over to your son, because he's 40, and it's time for him. And so you hand it to him, and you say, sorry, you're going to have to fix this. I don't think that's fair. My analysis indicates that we're headed for a global average temperature rise in the next decade of only up to slightly above hothouse. And I take a more conservative approach than the referee journal literature in a couple of cases. If I don't do that, if I accept the conservative outcome from the referee journal literature, instead of opting for Sam Carana's even more conservative approach, I get us right there. The highest temperature observed on planet Earth in the last 2 billion years over the course of the next 9 years. That time, there was essentially no complex life on Earth. That time, it took an order of magnitude longer for that temperature rise, at least an order of magnitude longer. Again, we tend to think of ourselves as very special, and we might get out of this, right? The headline in The Guardian might be wrong. We don't know. We haven't gone extinct yet. I promise we will. It's guaranteed. Every species that precedes ours has gone extinct. Every species goes extinct. Every human being dies. Every living being dies. It's a bummer, I know. And every species goes extinct, and that's a bummer too. Anyway, we think we're so special, right? So we've been here for this long, 300,000 years. The universe has been here about 13.8 billion years. 13.8 billion years, and we showed up about 300,000 years ago, and we think, oh, it's all about us. Congratulations, universe, you finally made the real deal. Again, that human supremacy approach. So adding together those self-reinforcing feedback loops, the so-called positive feedbacks, along with global dimming, along with the temperature locked in as a result of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere. We add all that up, we get up to some really, really high temperature in 9 years from now. If instead, we don't add them up, but we take an exponential function approach and fit an exponential curve to the data, we get there in about 2021, 4 years from now. So it could be it's a lot faster unless you think this is just ridiculous. Again, this is Sam Carana's analysis, and he's projecting forward based on recent data. If you think this is ridiculous, consider that he did the same thing in 2012 and concluded we were headed for 4C above baseline in 2030. And now that number seems ridiculously low. So that analysis from 2012 has proven to be very conservative. So I don't think this is insane. I don't think this is the last word. I don't think there is a last word until there's a last human, and the last human won't know they're the last human. It'll just seem rather lonely. Man, I have a lot of time to read. Neighbors sure have been quiet lately. Can you give me a... Oh yeah, she hasn't been here for a while. We won't know when the last human has gone extinct. So we won't know when any of these projections, quote, come true. We don't even know when we're going to die. I would love it. I would love it if I had an expiration date stamped on my heel. Right, I could take off my shoes and check it every now and then. Oh yeah, I got another 3 years left. I can continue acting like a jerk. It's okay, it doesn't hurt a thing. And then, right, when there's like 4 days left, I go, oh geez, 4 days, I better call all those people and apologize to them. I better complete those relationships so the people who come to my funeral don't say nasty things, or maybe nobody will come if I don't just make up for all this stuff. It'd be great if we knew when we were going to die. The worst thing is ambiguity, isn't it? It's just not knowing. You could get hit by a bus when you walk out there today. You could die today. We could all be dead in 4 years. We could all be dead in 9 years. Or maybe not. I suspect that in light of an ice-free Arctic Ocean, an event predicted by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College to occur sometime between 2013 and 2019. 2016, they said, plus or minus 3 years. And so I'd say we dodged 4 bullets so far. But we're headed for an ice-free Arctic. Looks like it's this year. Looks like the Arctic will have no ice on it, perhaps as early as August, and almost certainly by the end of the melt season on, say, September 20th. That'll be the first time that's happened in 3 million years. Humans on the planet, 300,000 years. First ice-free Arctic in 3 million years. That doesn't sound good. It's difficult for me to imagine that we won't have an ice-free Arctic this year or maybe next year. In any event, we're headed there in the not-too-distant future. And when that happens, how do we avoid the release of 50 gigatons of methane hydrate from the relatively shallow seafloor of the Arctic Ocean that is, quote, highly possible for abrupt release at any time? This based on the work of field researcher Shakova and 3 colleagues at the European Geophysical Union meetings in late 2008. They said it was highly possible at any time almost a decade ago. I'm stunned it hasn't happened yet. And if it does happen, if we get that first 50 gigaton burst of methane, that would cause global average temperature to rise about 1.3 degrees Celsius, take us well beyond the point at which we've had humans on the planet, almost certainly collapse civilization. That adds another up to 3 degrees in the absence of global dimming, and bam, we're at about 6 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline in a year from now. At 4C, all we can prepare for is extinction. So this would be inconvenient. Again, this is based on the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College's prediction of an ice-free Arctic in 2016 plus or minus 3 years. If that happens this year, and the ice is very fragile and very thin, so it could, and that could, I'm not saying it will, but it could trigger the 50 gigaton burst Natalia Shakova and colleagues warned about in 2008, and then lied about 2 years ago. You can find this online. You can go on your smartphone right now. Please don't. Maybe when we're done. And find out that at the European Geophysical Union meeting, the abstracts are still right there online from 2008. You can find out that this is exactly what they wrote in the abstract and what Shakova reported in her paper. And then in 2015, she said in an interview, quote, "We never stated that such a release was possible in near or distant future." We never stated. I guess I don't understand what "we never stated" means, because they did. She could have retracted. She could have gotten the research team together and said, you know, it looks like we were probably wrong and we were hyperbolic and we weren't conservative enough. And the modelers like David Archer and Gavin Schmidt are saying that it's going to be slower. So let's just say we were wrong. Let's retract that statement. But they didn't. Instead, she lied. We never stated. Curious. So this could happen. So any day could be our last. Could be faster than that. It could be this fall. It could be all of the great financial crises in history have occurred essentially in September. All of them, for reasons I don't completely understand. Everything from the beginning of the Great Depression to the 2008 global financial crisis is associated with a big collapse in the stock market in September. One exception, Enron, was October 1st. Not September, but October 1st. So it could be that this September we have what Tom Hartman predicted in his 2013 book. It could be we have the crash of 2016 and it just showed up a year late. When I saw this book, I thought that's incredibly conservative. He puts together a very conservative approach and he comes up with a great financial crash, way worse than 2008 last year. And clearly he was wrong, or maybe he was just ahead of his time, as he is with respect to so many factors. So it could be that the collapse of civilization all by itself comes by this October. I'm not making that prediction, a lot of people are. But people have been wrong about that before. My point is, we don't know the expiration date. It's not stamped on our heels. We don't know what it is for our species. We don't know what it is for us as individuals. It could be that in 80 days, there will be no habitat for humans on Earth. 80 days. It could be. It could be that it takes 4 years. It could be that it takes 9 years. It could be that there's a sociopath living in a bunker with a few other sociopaths eating stored food and stored water and breathing stored air 10 or 15 or 20 years from now. It could be the last human being dies in a bunker because they got tired of living with like-minded sociopaths, so they killed each other. I'm not predicting any of these things. I'm just contemplating the absurdities of the human condition. I get this a lot. And the answer is yes. I seem like such a bummer. Really. I mean, this message is not one anybody wants to hear. This is like you go to your medical doctor, and your medical doctor, and this used to be me, by the way. When I first started presenting this message, I'd like look at the clipboard and never make eye contact with the patient and say, you know, it looks like you don't have long, maybe 6 or 8 weeks to live, and be sure to pay the receptionist on the way out. And oh, look at the time, I guess I gotta go play some golf, and bye, I'll see you, or maybe I won't. You know, that was me. That was the left brain, uber scientific me, acting like a scientist and just presenting the information. And then one of the first people to host me on one of these tours, after the first presentation, we're driving back to the house. And it's kind of chilly, like emotionally, in the cab of the car. And I didn't know what was going on. And she finally turns to me and she says, "You're not doing that anymore." I'm like, what? I just gave them the terminal diagnosis. They had a right to know. If I didn't do that, it was malpractice. And she says, "You're not doing it like that anymore." That was probably good advice. So I do have good news. You get to die. Okay. That you get to die is truly miraculous because it means you get to live, should you so choose. We know a lot about DNA. We know a lot about the universe. We know how many atoms are in the universe, believe it or not. This is what scientists do with your money. They count atoms in the universe. Atoms, not Adams. You know, not guys named Adam. Anyway. So we know how many atoms there are in the universe, and we know about DNA. So we know that for this collection, for you to appear in physical form with your genetic material, the odds against that happening, the odds against you being you, exceed the odds against plucking a single atom at random from the entire universe. From the entire universe. The odds against you being here and sitting in that chair and putting up with this nonsense so far exceed the odds against buying one lottery ticket every week and winning every week for 500 years. Do you think that's even possible? Of course not. Nobody would go buy a lottery ticket every week for 500 years because it will seem rather short. But in addition to that, but in addition to that, nobody would expect to win every week for 500 years. You won the lottery. You get to be here. These millennials, they tell me shit like YOLO, right? YOLO, you know that one? You only live once? No. No, 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 no. Not true. YODO. You only die once. You live every day. If you want to live, you can live every day. Someday we will all die. But on all the other days, we won't, if you choose.